It was a cool summer evening as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and orange. The air was thick with the scent of barbecues and the laughter of children playing in the street. Mrs. Johnson, a kind-hearted woman with auburn hair and warm brown eyes, walked down the familiar sidewalk, humming to herself as she made her way home from work. She was unaware that her peaceful evening was about to take a tragic turn. Behind her, a group of teenagers lurked in the shadows. They were marijuana addicts, high on their latest fix and drunk on cheap beer. Their eyes were bloodshot and their speech slurred. They had been planning this robbery for days, carefully plotting the perfect time to strike. As Mrs. Johnson walked past them, they sprang into action. They surrounded her, trapping her against a brick wall. One of them pressed a knife against her throat, threatening to kill her if she didn't hand over her wallet and purse. Mrs. Johnson, terrified, did as she was told. The teenagers quickly searched through her belongings, stealing her money and credit cards. But their leader seemed unsatisfied. He glared at her, his pupils tiny pinpricks in his red-rimmed eyes. "Where's the rest of it?" he demanded, his voice slurred and menacing. "Where's the good stuff?" Mrs. Johnson didn't understand what he meant. I don't have anything else," she stammered, her heart racing in fear. The leader of the group, a tall boy with piercing green eyes and a sneer that never left his lips, growled in frustration. He shoved Mrs. Johnson roughly, causing her to stumble backwards. "Don't play us for fools, old lady. We know you've got something hidden somewhere." Mrs. Johnson's heart raced as she tried to regain her balance. She felt a sharp pain in her head where she had hit it on the wall, and her vision began to blur. I don't have anything else," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Please, just leave me alone." The leader of the group, his face twisted in anger, reached out and roughly grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "Then prove it," he spat, his breath hot against her face. "You're hiding something, and we're going to find it." Mrs. Johnson screamed in pain as he yanked her hair even harder, tears streaming down her face. The other members of the group laughed cruelly, enjoying her suffering. One of them began to search through her pockets, while another rifled through her purse. They tore through her belongings, scattering her possessions across the sidewalk like garbage. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson's head throbbed where it had been slammed against the brick wall. Her vision swam in and out of focus, and she felt disoriented and nauseous. As they continued to search her, she began to lose consciousness, her eyelids growing heavier and heavier. One of the teenagers, a burly boy with a ring pierced through his nose, snorted in derision. "This old lady's got nothin'," he said, wiping his hands on his dirty jeans. "Let's just get out of here before someone sees us." But their leader was not so easily deterred. He glared at Mrs. Johnson, his green eyes burning with anger and frustration. "You're lying," he hissed. "You're hiding something important, and we're going to find it." With a furious yell, he kicked Mrs. Johnson in the stomach, sending her sprawling across the pavement. She let out a sharp cry of pain, the breath knocked out of her. As she lay there, struggling to draw air into her lungs, the leader knelt down beside her. His hands shook with rage as he roughly searched through her clothes, feeling her body up and down. Finally, he froze. His eyes widened in realization. "Oh," he breathed, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "So that's how you've been hiding it." He reached down and roughly yanked the necklace from around her neck. It was a simple gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of a heart. The pendant had a tiny key engraved on it. "This must be what you've been hiding," he sneered. "Well, too bad, old lady. It's ours now." He stood up, clutching the necklace in his fist. "Let's get out of here," he ordered, his voice harsh. "But next time, we'll be more careful who we mess with." With that, the group of teenagers turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Mrs. Johnson lying motionless on the ground. Blood trickled down her forehead where she had hit it, and her heart raced wildly in her chest. She struggled to sit up, gasping for breath, her world spinning around her. Her last thought before she blacked out was of the pain in her head and the loss of her cherished necklace. Time passed. Mrs. Johnson woke up in the hospital, her head wrapped in bandages and a dull ache throbbing through her body. The necklace was gone, and she knew that she would never see it again. The police had found no trace of the teenagers who had attacked her, and she had no choice but to accept the fact that they might never be brought to justice. As she lay in bed, staring up at the sterile white ceiling, she felt a mixture of anger, frustration, and profound sadness. Weeks went by, and Mrs. Johnson slowly began to heal. The doctors assured her that her injuries would eventually fade, and she would be able to return to her normal life. But deep down, she knew that something had been taken from her that could never be replaced. She often found herself thinking about the necklace, wondering what it had meant to the person who had given it to her, and what kind of memories and feelings it had held. One day, as she was leafing through a magazine in the hospital waiting room, she came across an advertisement for a support group for victims of crime. Intrigued, she decided to give it a try. At the first meeting, she was greeted by a group of strangers who shared similar stories of loss and trauma. They listened to her tale with understanding and empathy, and she felt a sense of connection that she hadn't felt since before the attack. Over the course of several meetings, Mrs. Johnson began to open up about her experiences. She shared her anger and frustration, but also found solace in the knowledge that she was not alone. One day, a woman named Emma approached her after the meeting. Emma had been through a similar ordeal, and she offered Mrs. Johnson a small piece of advice. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes it's not about finding what was taken from us. It's about finding ourselves, and learning to move forward." Mrs. Johnson thought about these words as she made her way home from the hospital. She knew that Emma was right. She couldn't change what had happened, or bring back her necklace. But she could choose how she responded to it. She could use this experience as a catalyst for growth and transformation, and emerge from it a stronger, more resilient person. And so, Mrs. Johnson began the long and difficult process of rebuilding her life. She joined a gym to regain her strength and confidence, took up painting as a form of therapy, and even considered going back to school to pursue a degree in art. She made new friends and learned to appreciate the small moments of joy that life could offer. Slowly but surely, she began to heal. As the years passed, Mrs. Johnson thought less and less about the teenagers who had attacked her and more about the life she had built for herself. The scars on her body faded, and the memories of that terrible night became less vivid. But she never forgot the lessons she had learned from her ordeal, the importance of resilience, the power of connection, and the strength that can be found within oneself. And she knew that, no matter what happened, she would always carry with her the memory of the cherished necklace and the love that had been given to her.